you once again, everybody, for joining tonight. I mentioned it to a few others earlier in that, but I think we have a schedule. The winter storms are on a cycle or a schedule, I should say, that the third Wednesday of every month, we're almost guaranteed to have a winter storm. So tonight being the third Wednesday of February, we've got that storm that second time in a row now that we've had our presentation night canceled as far as the in-person, but it's great that we have this Zoom option. So we've got a good group of people that are that have come in and joined here tonight. We've got a total of 29 right now. So with that tonight, and I'll get into Greg's information here in a few minutes in that, but a huge thank you for Greg Holden for putting together a presentation tonight on learning to see creatively. I want to just mention a few other upcoming events that we've got here over the next couple of months. We've got the, let's see here, one thing that's open right now, and entries can be submitted up through February 27th. So you've still got, I guess, close to a couple more weeks in that, but that's the Exploring the Light. That's the art show with the City of Lone Tree, and it will be held at the Lone Tree Arts Center. And again, entries are available through February 27th, up to 3 entries per submission. The jurying will be February 28th through March 3rd, and notification of those that are selected will be on March 6th. And then you've got time to order prints and so forth and that for the drop-off. That would be April 4th. There's a reception the afternoon of April 8th over there again at the Lone Tree Art Center, and then images will be up on display there at the Art Center all the way through June 6th, which is when the pickup is. This year we have more categories than we've had in the past. Those categories this year are landscape, astro, night photography, astro/night photography, I should say, animals, composites, portraits, sports, drone, and travel. The judge for this year's event is Shannon Squires-Taves, a award-winning photographer from Colorado Springs. It's interesting that one of our categories is composites because that's one of her specialties. So it'll be interesting to see how she judges those ones. A couple of other things that are non-Lone Tree events and that, but other things that people might be interested in coming up. We heard earlier that there's I guess this Saturday, down in Manitou Springs, there's the carnival event. I guess there's a a parade and some other interesting things that very interesting things that take place down there and that. So that's this Saturday. Also, for those that are interested in portrait photography, there's a high-end workshop down in that area, Colorado Springs, this Saturday. Johnny Edwards is the person presenting. So it's not a PPC event, but it's another group that's down there in the Colorado Springs area, but they've got a portrait workshop just one day down there this coming Saturday. Upcoming Lone Tree Photography Club events, we've got on March 1st, which will be our next meeting, and that's Wednesday, March 1st. It's an exhibition night. So this is for those that haven't attended these before, and that it's a great opportunity to enter up to 4 images. They don't get judged. It's not a competition, but it's a great opportunity again to provide some of the information that you have as far as what you were thinking about when you took the image, what kind of processing you may have used and so forth in that. And then we open up the floor to other members of the club to offer suggestions and kind of light critiques in that, but it is a great learning opportunity in that. So we have that on March 1st. March 15th, we have our own Dave Purcell, who will be presenting on Lightroom tips and tricks. Again, Dave Purcell is the last 2 years the Lone Tree Club Advanced Photographer of the Year. So look forward to seeing what he's going to show us on Lightroom, and that is particularly with a lot of the new features that have come out, masking and so forth, and that the program has available to it now. This will be a real good opportunity to learn from Dave, and that is on March 15th. The next meeting would be April 5th, and that is our next competition night. That one is portraits, I guess people, pets, portraits, and also silhouettes. The judge for that event is Cliff Lawson. So Cliff Lawson was the presenter last month when we had a presentation on portraits. So again, dig up your notes from that meeting and get ready to submit hopefully some nice portraits for the April 5th competition night. And then on April 19th, we have Cole Thompson, and he always has really good presentations, really with a high emphasis on black and white images and that. So that will be on April 19th. So that will take us through at least the next couple of months. There's other events in that will take place throughout the rest of the year in that, but we're off to a good start with some good programs here over the next couple of months. With that, I did want to do a real quick introduction of our guest tonight. Thank you again, Greg Holden, tonight's presentation on learning to see creatively. Greg, I just learned here this evening, is from Longmont, Colorado, so up a little bit north of Denver. He enjoys taking photos during his outdoor adventures. Really focuses a lot on the small scenes, so I'm sure we'll see a lot of that here in his presentation, but often looking for the things that are overlooked by most photographers. Looking for interesting shapes and juxtapositions. Again, and many of the times those things are in the small scenes that we often don't see if we're looking at the big grand landscapes and that many of us tend to look at. He says that photography provides an artistic release from his day job, and his day job is a aerospace engineer. He also enjoys teaching others and speaking, and also judging for other camera clubs and that. So earlier tonight, we've already been kind of twisting his arm towards maybe judging for one of our upcoming events later on this year. So with that, I'll go ahead and, unless anybody has any questions, we'll go ahead and turn it over to Greg, if you want to share your screen.
Yeah, let me go ahead and share, turn off my video here. All right, everyone see my screen?
Yep, we can see it.
Yes, it's there. Thank you.
So let me just, thanks for the introduction. I'll just start off by saying, feel free to stop me at any time during the presentation if you have questions about something I said or about the photo itself. I'm happy to entertain those throughout. And then of course, we can also do questions at the end. All right, so let me jump into this. And now, so this presentation is called Learning to See Creatively. And this is actually one of my older presentations. It's evolved over time. Every year I seem to be going in and tweaking it a little bit. But my goal tonight is to try to show you just some different ways of seeing, maybe different perspectives that you hadn't considered before in your photography, or just different things you haven't thought of. And so with all my presentations, I will use my entire arsenal of photos. And you're going to see and hear photos taken with an iPhone 4, photos taken with a Nikon D50 beginner camera, all the way up to my brand new D850 professional camera, and huge assortment of lenses. So really it's about using the tools that you have available to you. And hopefully I'll show or maybe prove to you tonight that you can take some really creative, interesting images, even with just a smartphone or a starter camera. So let's start off with this quote from, we were talking about photographers at the beginning of the night here. And so Elliot Erwitt, I'm not a huge street photographer myself, but I do appreciate Elliot's work. And I really like this quote for him. And this, to me, this has kind of formed a foundation of how I approach photography. So I'll read this to you for those that may be listening and not watching the screen. To me, photography is an art of observation. It's about finding something interesting in an ordinary place. I found it has little to do with the things you see and everything to do with the way you see them. So with that, let's jump into it. So let me start with this photo. So this is Blackwater Falls in West Virginia. And it's very popular falls because you see it's a nice big size, very popular for fall color. So I was there actually on a workshop, and you try to time these workshops around when you think the fall color is going to be. And this year we kind of missed it, right? We're a little early. We got some nice fall color there in the upper left, but there wasn't really fall color in the rest of the scene. And if you ever go to Blackwater Falls, you can take this exact same shot. They make it easy for you because there's these wooden stairs You walk down the hill and the stairs, and there's a nice little landing where you can stand and take this perspective. So I'm there, and this is what I see, and it's not particularly inspiring to me, right? I don't have all the great fall color I was hoping to see. We'd had some storms and stuff earlier in the week, so the water was all churned up. You see a lot of that dirt in the water, a lot of silt coming up because the water was all churned up. And, it's a beautiful shaped fall, but it wasn't speaking to me. And so, when you find yourself at a location and it's just not resonating with you, try to do something different. Like what else can you do with the scene? How can you interpret it maybe a little differently? And so for me, I'm studying the scene and I'm saying this not, this shot is not going to work for me. So I'm looking at this waterfall and saying, well, what about this waterfall is interesting to me? And there's a lot of different things. But this one area I focused on was this rock outcropping. I really just liked how that rock was jutting out there, and there was some a little bit of water coming over it. And I was like, maybe if I got down a little further and switched out lenses to my telephoto, I could isolate that, and maybe I can get something I'm more interested in. So there we go. So this is the final shot I ended up with. Ended up going black and white because color wasn't really part of this image. When I'm zoomed in like this, the rock was pretty dark to begin with. So to me, this was a more interesting image. Resonated a lot with me creatively. And I also thought it was different than the image that everyone else was taking of this kind of wide shot of the falls. Does anyone know what this is?
Is it an acorn?
All right, good guess. Yeah, most people say right off the bat it's a hermit crab. All right, you see those kind of looks like claws, and so the way I was at my mom's house, and she just had a bumper crop of acorns that year, and they were all over the ground, and there were a bunch of them were sprouting. And so I got down low with my macro lens. And I said, well, it's such a lot of interesting textures and colors here. How can I isolate that from the rest of everything else? And so using my macro lens allowed me to really blur out that background and focus on the details of this acorn. And as I got down to that low perspective, I started to kind of revisualize what I was seeing. And to me, it looked like some type of hermit crab. I grew up in Maryland, spent many, many years going to Ocean City, Maryland on the boardwalk, and they sell hermit crabs there to all the tourists. And so that was something I brought to the image and said, how can I maybe mislead some people with the way I've composed this image to make it look like some type of creature. But obviously you study a little bit more, you see the acorn top shell there on the right, and you can see it's no eyes on this strange creature. So it's just this acorn sprouting. But good job, first guess. Yeah, most of the time I hear hermit crab as the first guess. So this is a close-up of my pants. And so I like to say that inspiration can strike anywhere. In this case, I'm an engineer, and I tend to dress maybe a little nicer than the typical Dilbert engineer. And so I wear dress slacks a lot. And so one day I'm at work and I'm in the bathroom sitting on the throne there, and I'm looking down at my trousers. I'm like, wow, there's a lot of interesting details in my pants with the stitching and the buttons and where the different types of fabric come together. So that weekend, I pulled out all my pants onto the ground, and just with some window light and my macro lens, just started doing close-up detailed shots of my pants. And so I did this whole series called In My Pants. And I posted that on Facebook and got lots of laughs, and people were wondering why I'm taking pictures of inside my pants. And this one is taken with my macro lens at its maximum setting of f32. So for all those people that say, after f11 or f16, you start to get diffraction and you lose sharpness, not the case for a macro lens. Macro lenses are designed for that very small apertures. So really nice detail on this. And so I did a whole series of some graphic images, some I focused on where the fabric intersected. And so an image like this, like I would never submit this image to a gallery or a competition. This image is not going to wind up on the front of Macro Photography Monthly or something like that. But the idea is I'm training myself to see creatively. And sometimes it's not just enough to look at something, but you actually have to spend the time to photograph it, to capture the image, have your mind really focusing on that task, to capture the different compositions. And so, like I said, this image, not super noteworthy, but it's about training my eye. And then maybe I'll use some of these elements, some of these compositional design choices in a later image that I would be proud to submit to a magazine or a gallery. Anybody know what this one is?
It looks like oil in a dish.
Close. Anyone else?
Guys can
So
put
this
it.
is
Go ahead. Go
other
ahead.
guess.
No, I was going to say, I'll tell them they can put stuff in the chat too, because most people are muted.
Okay, yeah, I'm not watching the chat, so if they're saying chat stuff, just let me know.
Okay.
So this is Coca-Cola. So I was at home one day and I had a can of Coke and I just happened to slam it down on the table a little hard and a bunch of soda splashed up onto the lip. And of course, soda being all effervescent, all these nice bubbles. And so some of them were reflecting the cola, so the golden color, and some of them were, you could see right through them to the metal silver lid there. And I was like, wow, I could really do something interesting with this. And so I spent the afternoon shaking up soda and intentionally spilling it all over the place and made a huge mess all over my kitchen floor. But I did a whole series of just trying to come up with different compositions of the soda on the lid and utilizing the curves to kind of balance out the circles from the bubbles, and then trying to play with proportions with how much red I include at the top, as well as how much of that opening of the soda can I include at the bottom. Usually you don't like big black voids like that. They call them black holes that your eyes get too focused on. But for this composition, I thought it worked out okay because I had enough of the other stuff to kind of balance it out. So it's about, again, it's like the inside my pants story. Always be on the lookout for creative opportunities. So this is Chincoteague Lighthouse. Assateague Lighthouse in Southern Maryland. Well, it's Virginia, but I call it Southern Maryland. Maryland, Virginia area. And it is if you're on the mid-Atlantic coast, it is a well-photographed lighthouse, nice size, height, and it's constantly upkeep with its painting of the red and white bands on it. So very photogenic, and there's, one great spot you can stay in and you get a nice whole shot of the lighthouse and the little storage house next to it. But I'm, walking up to this lighthouse and I just was captivated by this scene, and I'm there with my family. It's probably the worst possible day to take photographs, probably 11 o'clock in the morning. It's a really bright sun casting really dark shadows. And I didn't have my camera with me, like I said, with my family. And so I just took out my smartphone and took a photo, and just trying to isolate some of the shapes and the play of the light and the shadow of the image. And so this is not a high res image. I print this out about 8x10. You get any more than that, so to get pretty noisy. And then later, I really like this image. And so later I went back with my SLR, my tripod. We had been staying there a couple of days. And so I went back the same time, and I could just never get the same photo that I'd taken before. Just the light was always a little different, or the shadows a little different. Even though I tried to stand in the same spot and at the same time of day, it just, the conditions were unique that particular day, or maybe I was just, inspired that particular day to see this scene. So kind of lesson here is take the photo when you see it. You might not have all your fancy camera gear with you. You might just have your smartphone and take the picture. So, I could try to upsize this with software or something like that, but it doesn't really matter. For me, it's just, I captured a scene that I saw and inspired me, allowed me to study the image, study the composition, and help develop my creativity. This is Carey Furnace up in Pennsylvania. And so it's an abandoned ironworks furnace that supported Bethlehem Steel. And you can take tours of it. And it's a very chaotic image, right? There's a lot going on here, all these pipes all over the place. In color, it's even more kind of garish with this different graffiti and the different shades of paint and stuff like that. And so I went to this sepia conversion to try to dull down some of those extra colors and extra influences. So it is kind of a busy image, but I am trying to find a little bit of rhythm to it, kind of some order, trying to narrow in your focus so you can kind of see the little tunnel that's kind of created in between these big cylinders and the big plumbing in between them. And you can your eye can kind of weave your way in there in between the different pipes. And so, sometimes people see something like this that's very busy and say, oh, it's too chaotic. It's too, judges will say, there's nowhere for my eye to land. I don't have one point of focus. And to those judges, I say, pish tosh. You can have busy scenes that are still interesting, that just cause you to explore the image even more, to really dive into what else can I see in there? What's in the background? And really spend time exploring the image. I was with my son at a park, and I saw this basketball court was painted these kind of fun colors for the kids. And I liked this interplay of the white stripe and the blue, and then the crack that's kind of dividing it all. And so again, here's an image, much like the kind of the button or the pants before, not super noteworthy, not going to be a gallery image that I'm going to submit, but it's just about seeing these lines and shapes, the interplay of texture with the shapes and the colors, to just train my eye to see different things and just practice different compositions that I like, that later I can maybe extrapolate into some other image that I take. I love going to junkyards and finding old cars. And so I'll show you two versions of this car. So this is the back door of this car. And you can see it's got all kinds of pollen and dirt and stuff that's landed on it, and rain streaks. And so this one, it was kind of a play of colors, but also of shapes. Wonderful kind of curve down there in the lower right, mimicked by the door. Then we got some more straight lines, more angular stuff towards the top. And then, of course, the door handle there is kind of a mixture of both. So it's kind of, to me, this is a study of both color and study of shape. I'm not trying to take a full image of the car. Maybe a car aficionado could tell me exactly what kind of car this is just by the handle there. But most people wouldn't necessarily know what kind of car it is, other than it's an older style car. But that wasn't important, right? The idea here was about the shapes and the colors. So, but you take one interesting photo that you like, you don't let go of a subject, try other compositions. And so I took this, what I thought was a pretty good shot of the back door. So then I said, what can I do with the front door? So I want to do something a little bit different, and new, kind of from the car's dark color anyway. And this particular part of the car didn't have some of those other colors that the back door had. So I knew this one would be a black and white. And so kind of playing off the vertical lines there on the right and along the top to this very interesting dynamic shape there in the middle with the pitted handle there and the little keyhole. And then we got some other little interesting supporting characters there in the lower left with the streaks of the rain on this car that's been sitting out for probably a few decades. All right, let me talk a little bit about image flow and how we can kind of take maybe some of these scenes like the Carrie Furnace one we saw earlier, maybe a little chaotic, and how we can create a little order to them. So this is up in New Hampshire, kind of right on the border of Vermont. This is called Madame Sherry's Stairs or something like that. Some rich lady, and she had a big castle type of house there, and it burned down once upon a time, leaving just these stone steps. So a very popular photo destination for people in that neck of the woods. And so I debated a lot with this composition. We have this very strong element with the stairs, with the curves and leading up. And I opted to include the tree there on the right. And some people might say it's unnecessary and you could crop that out. But then I'm left with a big dead space in the upper right-hand corner that's just trees. And to me, it didn't feel like that balanced the image. So having that strong element of the tree on the right kind of balanced out this very heavy stone mass on the left, and kind of help fill up that upper corner a little bit and give it also some context as to where it was in this wooded area and some of the trees around it. And then even the color palette's very similar in the tree trunk colors to what the color of the stones are. Back to Carey Furnace again. So this is some big industrial machine that they had there in their big open space. And this thing is monstrous. The opening on the right is probably 8, 9, 10 feet in diameter. And then the door there on the left is probably 4 or 5 feet in diameter. So a huge piece of machinery. And so this is just an iPhone shot. This is kind of what my eye saw. It's kind of gravitated to just how massive this was, but it really wasn't about the size. To me, it was about the shapes. I mentioned I'm an engineer by trade, and so I'm into the geometry, and hopefully you'll see that kind of resonate through some of my photography. So this is what I saw, right? And so I said, wow, a lot of interesting things there. Got interesting shapes. I got textures. I got some interesting colors. I love the intersection of the two wheels together. And so that's about trying to pare down what's going on here to something that emphasizes all the good stuff that you like, and then takes away some of the other stuff. So obviously there's some other equipment and stuff in the background you see on the left there. That wasn't interesting, so I knew I needed to exclude that. I didn't think I needed to show both of the wheels or both of the doors in their entirety. So trying to really focus down. And so this is the final image I came up with. So isolating down that intersection between the smaller wheel there on the left and then the larger one, and then with some selective dodging and burning in post-production, just kind of bring out the different shades of gray that I wanted in this black and white image. And then went a little bit over the top with the processing for the texture to really make that kind of punch, make it really jump out at you. So, quite a difference from this to the final image there. And again, it's about focusing on what things are of interest to you, and then making sure that those interesting things to you are the star of the show. And then everything else kind of falls into place as supporting characters. You're out in the woods. I think this is up in Glacier National Park. And so just, it seems like a snapshot, right? Just a picture of some rapids, some water going through. But, as I'm taking photos and taking multiple photos, I'm trying to see how things kind of play together. And so I'm kind of finding these kind of parallel waves crashing here. And, this is something that, it's somewhat by the geometry of the stream, but sometimes it's just somewhat random, right? You take a couple different photos, you see what one looks well. So these are the kind of things I'm looking for as I compose some of these images, how I can see, parallel lines or things mimicked or multiplied in an image. Sometimes your flow is just right to left, just like we read a book. This is back to Assateague Island. So a sunrise there's a very popular thing for photographers. And a lot of times the light doesn't work out for you, but I balanced or leveled out my tripod and then just did a long pan, a couple of seconds where I'm panning my camera. And so all those crashing waves coming in just turn into white streaks. And then the rising sun gets that wonderful orange color in the sky. And this one, I have this here as a 2:3 aspect ratio, which is how I captured it. This one also looks great as a square crop. And I use square crop a lot when I find an image that I'm not quite sure what to do with it. Sometimes square crop gives it an interesting perspective. So something to keep in mind. So this one, I'll do the reverse of what I've been doing. I'll show you the before. Well, I guess I'll show you with the pipes there. But before, then we'll show you the after again. So this is at a Gardens, a Rawlings Conservatory in Baltimore, Maryland. Really, it's a very small little garden, but they have a nice little desert area. And so I saw this little plant, and you see the label there, white paintbrush. And so it's not very big. You can see compared to the image on the left of my camera, about the size of a dinner plate. So it's not super big, but I really love these petals. They're just overlapping, and they have a wonderful green color. And then there's this little streak of white on the edge of them. So I really want to isolate that down. And so I got out my macro lens, and so you see I'm right up in the corner, trying to keep my tripod out of their gardens, just leaning over as much as I can to get the angle I want. And so this is the image I came up with. Again, isolating down the stuff I liked, the overlapping, little white fringes there on the edges of the plant, and then finding this little S curve that goes up through the middle of the image. So purposely composing for that. So this is the image I envisioned. Like I said, I love that green color. This one I actually entered last year at the Louisville Fine Art Photography show, and it won first place in its category. So I love it as it is, but sometimes you need to reinvent yourself or maybe look at your photos in a different way. And so one winter, I kind of challenged myself to take some of my favorite color photos and see if I can make a successful black and white photo of them. So this is one that I tried it with. And this one I thought turned out successfully. So a very different feel to it. I think you said one of your upcoming competitions is moodiness or something like that. So definitely a bit more moody here with this kind of really dark, high contrast processing that I did to it. Very kind of noir look, if you're familiar with those kinds of genre of movies. So very different feel than kind of the rich green of the one on the left. So what do people think? Do you like the green, the original color one, or you like the black and white version better? This is my chance to take a sip of water while you all are unmuting and saying which one you like.
Black one for me.
Black and white, totally.
Okay.
Yeah, in the chat, it looks like there's a mix here.
Okay.
A few more black and whites than color, but there are both.
Okay.
Both are represented. So.
Yeah, well, that's pretty typical. Yeah, I tends to be about 40-60. 40% like the color, 60% like the black. A lot of people comment on the black one. You can really appreciate this little kind of fringe, a little frillies there on the edges of the petals. A lot more in the black and white photo than in the color photo. And I think I also did some selective sharpening there too to really bring that out in the black and white version. So, all right, we're good. See, we got a couple more chats. Yeah, color black and white. So yeah, about half and half. Great. So here's kind of another interpretation. So just another plant there, just showing another way to take black and white. So this plant was all about the same sheen. It was getting all about the same light. And then just in post-processing, bringing out the white in a couple of the little plant things there, and then darkening everything else around it, just using the brush tool and Lightroom to go in there and darken the parts. So sometimes you don't even necessarily have to be accurate. You know, we're not working for the Audubon Society or something like that. We're taking something for a museum book or something like that. Let your artistic, interest go forward. And so I can make this plant half white and half black. That's not the way it was in real life, but that's the way I can choose to process it to make it my creative, put my own creative stamp on it. So this is in a factory I was in, and they had some dirt on the floor. They had some flooding. And so everyone's taking pictures of this factory. And I took some good shots of the factory too, and the equipment and stuff like that. But I'm walking into this one corner where this flooding had occurred. And so this dirty water had come in, and then it had dried up and formed this interesting cracked ground. And so, of course, everyone around was like, Greg, what are you photographing? You're just looking at, there's nothing there. I was like, no, there is something here. And it can be chaotic, but there's also a little bit of thought given into where I see kind of curves, where I kind of see this funneling effect of the cracked mud. And so kind of taking that into account, I should say. And then we have those kind of bare spots on either side, kind of like maybe think a little yin yang. So balancing out the photo to where it is. So is an abstract, I would call it. Doesn't have one point of focus. It's really just a swath of texture and color, but definitely there is some thought given into how I compose that to make sure everything balances out properly. Love taking pictures of rocks. This is at some other gardens I was at in Maryland. And so just finding that kind of zigzag line along the cracks. It's very subtle, but if you look closely, you can kind of see where kind of shadows are and kind of following that zigzag kind of hatch line to allow your eyes to kind of lead you through the image. So here's one of me in action. This is back to Glacier National Park. I think it's called the Trail of Cedars. Has this wonderful boardwalk, walk through the trees there. And so I came across this little cluster of ferns here. And so this is where seeing creatively, you really got to be on the lookout, because you're on this boardwalk. There's these beautiful trees and stuff around. There's probably wildlife. I don't remember what else was there. But there's this little cluster of ferns. It was kind of hidden under some of these pine trees. And if you blinked, you'd walk past this cluster and you wouldn't even see it. But it caught my attention, and I said, well, yeah, it's just a small little cluster. I wish it was a huge, field of these ferns, but that's not what it was. It was just a small little group. And so I got out my lens and kind of zoomed in. You see, I put my tripod off over the railing, probably broke some park roll by doing that. But I was careful not to put the tripod on any plants, just made sure it was on the dirt. And so I'm leaning over there. Get a nice shot of my bald head. So my wife likes taking pictures of me taking pictures. So I'm isolating down this cluster of ferns. And so this is the image, this pretty much straight out of the camera. And so originally I thought this is the image I wanted, and the green. And much like the green we saw on the little white paintbrush, that was my original vision. And when I saw this, it was just too chaotic. I couldn't really make sense of it. I loved all the lines and all the little leaves and stuff like that, but I needed something more with it. And so I was kind of remembering back to that photo and the black and white conversion I did. And so I said, well, maybe I can make this a black and white and be a bit more successful. So this is a final image. So going to black and white allows me to hide some of the litter that was leaf litter that's underneath some of those leaves. Is kind of distracting. And then I went and selectively dodged and burned to some of the ferns on top, brighten them up so they kind of jump out a little bit more from the ferns below them. Again, like that other photo I showed you, the white and the black little plant, you don't have to stay true to what your exposure meter says or whatnot. You can play on the computer. And we were talking before this presentation started about Ansel Adams and showing some of his straight prints from the negatives. And it's pretty significant, some of the dodging and burning he did on a lot of his images. So don't feel bad about following suit. So this one, a little hosta, and this is at a little gardens by me where I used to live in Maryland. And again, filling the frame. I love that teardrop shape there in the middle. And so I'm looking at this image later that night when I'm home, and I can't decide about the water drops. I thought they were interesting at the time, but now looking at it, I say, well, I wish there was either more water drops, so it's more spread out water drops, or maybe there just doesn't need to be any water drops at all. Maybe I should have, taken my cloth out and wiped it off and made it nice and clean. So I debated with that, and it was a local park. I said, I can get back there. I'll go back there next week or whatever. And so finally next week comes around, like, oh yeah, let me go rephotograph that hosta before it, gets brown or something like that. So I go back to this park and I can't find this hosta. And I know it was in this one little area, this one little part of the garden. And I swore it was in this one little area. I'm looking around, and finally I find it, and it's just a stump. Some deer or creature had come in and eaten the thing down to the ground. So I was really bummed because this is a really good specimen. But kind of the lesson learned here is if you see something interesting and you capture on photo and you're reviewing your photos later that day, and it's not exactly what you want, and you have the opportunity to go back, do not wait a week to go back because your subject may not be there any longer. So go back and photograph it as soon as you can. So here, my little beer there, glass. So Orioles Park, I was going to the ballpark with some friends, and I guess I got there a little ahead of them. And so I'm eating my overpriced bratwurst with not too much peppers and onions, barely a sprinkle, it seems, and drinking my overpriced beer. And I'm looking out at the ballpark. And again, my mind is always on, right? The creative juices always keyed up, always looking for something. So I'm looking down, and I'm up there in the cheap seats, right, at the top, and I see all these chairs in front of me. I'm like, I could do something with that. And again, I don't have my camera here. I don't have, the lighting's kind of harsh. but I did have my smartphone. So I said, let me take some pictures. So this is the first image I captured. So I love that repeating pattern there. The green was kind of nice and getting some nice kind of rim light there from the strong light of the late in the day coming in. But I wasn't a fan of this kind of walkway right in front of me just because the angle I was using. And I like the green, but I don't know, it's a little too orderly for me. And so then I started to think, well, how can I make it different? How can I reinterpret what I originally saw and put a more of a creative spin on it? And so I decided just to tilt my camera, tilt my phone, and create a different angle. Let me zoom in a little tighter, so really fill in the frame with the seats. And so again, maybe not an award-winning image, but it's practicing my craft, practicing seeing, practicing different compositions, practicing how to take a scene that maybe wasn't working for me at first, and what else I can do to reinterpret it. And sometimes just tilting your camera a little bit creates a whole different type of look to the image, with this kind of leaning off into infinity up to the upper left there. So I took that one, and a couple years later, I'm in a totally different situation. I'm at this abandoned school in Pennsylvania. I was actually on a workshop photographing models, but in between my model shoots, I was photographing the school. And so I go up into the balcony, and I love these wooden chairs. They had some interesting patina on them, and the light from the windows had been covered in some blue tarps, casting this kind of weird blue cast light onto it. So this is kind of the first kind of image I took to kind of fill the screen with these repeating chairs, interesting colors. And I don't know, it's nice, but it just wasn't enough for me. And so kind of like my fern shot, I said, well, maybe black and white is the way to go. If it's really more about the light and the shadow, the repeating patterns and the lines, those are all great things for a black and white image. So here's the final image. I mentioned earlier about square crop sometimes can give you interesting perspective. So again, much like I did with some of the other photos, kind of going high contrast here, so just to emphasize those shapes and the lines and shadow, and then really brings out the white kind of rimming around the edges of the chair there. But so I took this is the photo I took. I knew I had something good here. I knew I had a good capture, and I'd be able to work with it in post-processing. And so I wasn't at the time necessarily knowing what the final image was going to be. But the important thing is, once much like the car we saw earlier, you see a subject that you like, that resonates with you, don't just take one composition, take different compositions. So later in the day, I'm down on the floor and I'm at a different angle, and the chairs looked very different. The light was a lot lower. So we're more of a moody kind of with a dark cast, but still getting those nice highlights. But this time, kind of these diagonal streaks going on the backs of the chair. So again, even though I thought I got a successful photo already, doesn't mean I can't get two successful photos out of the same subject. So I took this one, and I like this one as well. I think this is a great kind of compromise between a monochrome image and a color image. It's got a little bit of color in it, but it's also kind of a dark, almost monochrome. So just a lot going on here. And then that repeating shapes again. All right, so we've seen a couple of them, but I'm going to dive a little bit more into abstracts. And so this is a little bit more about really looking hard, as well as in some cases creating your own artistic creation. So this one is tulips at a garden, actually the same garden that Hasse was taken at. And this garden, they plant tulips every spring. It's very popular with photographers to go there. And so I'd been there many years by myself, and also part of photography workshops when I was first starting out. And I have a lot of pictures of tulips, all kinds of different colors and combinations, wide shots, different abstracts, all kinds of different things. And so I'm there, and I'm kind of doing my annual rite of passage, go see the tulips, and I'm just not feeling it. Like I've done that photo before, I've taken that before. And so what else can I do with this subject? What else is inspiring me? And so I just started doing some swipes. And so this is where you set your camera, typically a small aperture, like an f/16 or something like that. set your ISO low so you get a longer shutter speed, like maybe a quarter of a second or so. And you're intentionally moving your camera, swiping it up and down, sometimes on an angle, while you're clicking the shutter. So it's very experimental. I probably took dozens and dozens of these, and this is the one shot that I thought turned out well. And I really like the balance of the not only the color palette, but the balance of the blue in the upper right with the strong kind of white streaks of the unopened tulips there in the lower left. And so back in Maryland, there's an annual abstracts competition put on by this guy who owned this gallery. And so he'd bring in judges every year to judge this competition. And so one time my camera club had one of those judges as our presenter for the month. And so I showed him this photo. I said, I'm really proud of this photo. I think this really turned out well. And I'm thinking about entering in next year's abstract competition at that guy's gallery. You know, I heard you were a judge there in the past. What do you think of this one? And he looks at it and goes, nah, it's not that great. It's not very good. It's not abstract enough. No, it's not going to do well. And I was really crestfallen, right? I was really disappointed because I thought I'd really captured something really interesting. So I didn't listen to what he said, and I answered it anyway. Well, guess what? I didn't get accepted. It was not entered into the show. I saw some of the other images that entered the show. I was like, really? You picked those over mine? But that's how it goes. I think we were talking before the meeting started here about competitions. So that's how it goes, right? But I still really like this image. I still thought it had potential. So a year or two later, there's an even bigger exhibit. It was put on by all the camera clubs in the Northern Virginia area. Thousands of photos are submitted to this competition across a couple different categories. And so I submitted this one to the abstract category. So out of several hundred submissions, they picked about 70 or 80 photos for exhibit. My photo was selected for exhibit. And then it won best in class, best in abstract category out of hundreds and hundreds of entries. So it just goes the long story here is, just because someone else doesn't validate your photo, doesn't agree with your perspective, they're just one person. It's just one opinion. You know, if you're proud of a photo, either one, keep it for yourself. You don't have to show other people. It's your photo. Or, you know, keep trying, you know, keep showing it to other people because even though one person doesn't like it, someone else might like it. And clearly in this other case, a panel of 3 judges not only juried it in, but picked it as best in class. Move on. So after taking that photo, being so impressed, the next time I went to the garden, I was like, I got to do more of this swiping stuff. So this one kind of just up and down and going into black and white. And again, these are very experimental. You take dozens and dozens of these, varying your shutter speed, varying how fast you move your camera, and just wait till you get back on your computer. We can see nice and big and see what turns out. So does anyone know what this is a photo of? That same swiping technique. You can unmute yourselves and shout out your answer.
I have no clue.
Is it some paint stripes on something?
It's a good guess, but no.
I don't see anything in the chat.
Is it a flag?
Another good guess, but no. Yeah, some people have said it looks like scarves or something like that. So this is kayaks. So I'm at the waterfront, and there's this kayak club that stores their kayaks there. This is actually for a photography class I used to teach, and we go by this kayaks and we demonstrate this technique. So here, you see something interesting in the nice shapes, nice colors, but up close, this is just an iPhone shot here. Up close, they're not all that interesting. Got some words on there that whatever, got this ugly, frame thing that they're all hung on. But if you look past that and say, what is interesting? It's the shape was interesting, the different colors are interesting, and then finding a way to emphasize that. So in this case, doing a long exposure and swiping side to side. The sun was, as you can see on the later photo, the sun is behind these, right? These are in shadow. The sun is out there on the water. And so when I do this swipe, that long exposure gets me a good exposure on the kayaks that are in shadow, but the water behind it gets totally blown out because it's overexposed. But that's okay. It balances out well with these bright, vivid colors. All right, so here's another one where I'll show a series of something. So you can kind of tell right off the bat it's some type of wood. And so I saw this item, and I'll go through a couple of these here. So here's one composition, another composition. And you can see what this is. So I was at mini golf with my family, and they had this old wooden shed there, and the door's open. You can see it's got all this bleaching from the sun and rainwater kind of creating this interesting patterns. And they had the door, and I've been to this golf course many times with my family. It's a popular vacation spot for us. But it just happened to be there once when the shed of the door was open and revealing this interesting patterns. And so took a couple iPhone shots, and then I went back, and then later I could go back out with my camera. I came back and talked to the person at the front desk, some teenage kid working their summer job, say, "Hey, can I go take a picture of your shed?" And she's like, "Huh?" And she kind of looks back like, the wooden one? I'm like, "Yeah, it's got some interesting patterns on the door." And she's like, "Okay, whatever, knock your socks off." But some people just don't see the potential, right? They just see the wooden shed full of the clutter. Like, there's even a vacuum cleaner in there. Like, why do you have a vacuum cleaner at a mini golf? Are you vacuuming up the AstroTurf or something? I don't know. But it was that door that caught my attention. So I went back with my real camera, set my tripod, and did some, my finer exposures. So these are just a couple examples, but I probably have, 10 or 12 different examples, close-ups of different compositions that I really liked. So again, you find an interesting subject. Don't just take one interesting photo, take different compositions. See kind of where I isolated these two images from. So did a bunch of the tops there where I had those couple of knots that were kind of interesting to me. But then I like the bottom where it was kind of multiple layers of curves and the real nice intersection between the golden colors and the grays of the really stained weathered wood. Back at the beach, love when I find the intersection between different textures. In this case, the wind ripples on one half of the sand dune, and then the other half kind of blown more smooth, and then a wonderful little ripple snaking its way through the photo there. Going in really tight on details, kind of reminds me of like the feathers of a parrot or something like that, which is these triangular shapes kind of intersecting each other. So here I'm going to show you the same rock, and I'm going to show you how you can make two very, very different compositions to show you how you really need to really explore a scene and try a lot of different ideas. And so this is the first scene I saw. I like this interesting rock and the way the water patterns had formed around it. Kind of makes like the shape of an R. Maybe it's a port side view of a person. Profile shot is what the word I was going for. But I'm also kind of play of the smoothness of the right with the ripply pattern of the left, and then kind of the rock there to kind of anchor the image. So that was kind of why I saw it first. I say, this is interesting, and I can probably make other things of it. So then flipped my camera on its side, zoomed in for a totally different composition. So you can see we have some of these same things here with the texture and the smooth, but this time I'm not showing you all the curve, kind of forming that R shape. And now I'm just focusing on that intersection of that plain white sand to the ripply sand there. And again, having a rock as a bit of a focus point. So very different composition, but still using some of the same elements that I liked, just arranging them in a different way. One more rock, this one, it was not this ruby red. I did emphasize that a bit in post-processing. I call this one Comet. That's what it kind of looked like to me, this kind of red ball of heat coming through, and then the tail of the comet behind it, and then cropping in on that panoramic format crop to kind of emphasize those long lines trailing behind the rock. And then sometimes I just go total Jackson Pollock, total chaos, total abstract, no rhyme or reason to it. Kind of reminds me of one of those, was it Rorschach ink blot things. So you can look at this, and if you see like fluffy ponies, you're a nice person. If you see bats, you're not as nice person, or something like that. So it's however you want to interpret it. Just play of light and color and the streaks kind of going around, somewhat random, but maybe there's a little order there. If you look closely, there's some diagonal lines and intersections. Speaking of abstract, so this is Chicago River. I was going on one of those architectural boat tours, and we're walking to the boat, and so it's late morning, sun's not the greatest, but I saw this reflection, and it's just, I mean, if you go back to the same spot several days in a row, you'd probably not see this, and you'd see something totally different. Just happened to be that day, the way the light was reflecting the shadows of the building. There's a bridge nearby. It has some pillars and other little thin lines on it. Was making this, I call them like amoeba, very organic patterns. And so just the way the shadows were, you saw I got some bright blue spots there, and then I got the gold in the back. So a lot of different things going on. But I really liked this kind of craziness that was going on there. And so this is a shot right out of the camera, zero editing. This is kind of what it looked like to my eyes. But I really thought there was something more there. And so as I mentioned, I'm an engineer and I work a lot with electronics and circuit boards. So I kind of have ingrained in my head that rich green color of a circuit board. So that was kind of what I was envisioning when I saw the scene. And so I started processing it, playing with the colors in Lightroom to kind of get the color palette I wanted. And you can see I cropped down a little bit. I didn't need all those gold streaks at the top. I thought that was a little too distracting. Really want to focus on this lower left corner where the amoebas were a little bit more prominent. So I started doing that. So edited down, you crop down, working on my colors, but still it wasn't quite right. I'm there, I'm close, but it's not really calling out to me. So kept working on it because I knew there was potential there. And then this is the final image I came up with. So really, if you compare it, over the top color enhancement here, going with a square crop again to really emphasize down the most important parts of the image to me, the parts I thought were interesting. And I debated about the little blue blob in the lower left corner, whether to leave that in or not. And I don't know, I like it. I think it adds just some other little interest to it. Some people say it looks like a unborn baby or something like that. Kind of plays with the whole amoeba theme. Kind of looks like a head and like some shoulders down there or something like that. But that's like those ink blots, it's however you interpret it. But this is a final image, but obviously a far cry from this. And it's interesting, when I took that image and I was with my family and some of my cousins were with me, we were there for a wedding. There's like, what are you taking photos of, Greg? The Chicago River? Like, yuck. I was like, but it's got some interesting patterns there. They're like, yeah, but okay. They couldn't see the potential. And so this is where that training your eye, always taking photos, even if it's of your pants or whatever you're doing, it trains your eyes to see beyond the obvious and see what the photo could become.
Looks like a contour map.
Oh, yeah. Topographical map or something. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Uh-huh. All right. So one last category here. So kind of take some of these elements and then let's amp it up. Let's really go kind of crazy and what else we can do. So I call this variations on a theme. And I like this quote by Paul Dermy. He was a poet and writer, early 1900s. To make continuous discoveries in the visual world, one need only look with eyes whose retinas, with each blink, become virgin again. So I'm in Jamaica for a destination wedding a number of years ago. And so if you've ever been to a tropical place, taking photos of the palm fronds with the beautiful greens and yellows and stuff like that, very, very popular subject for photographers. And I took some photos like that, but I was like, what else could I do? How could I interpret this differently? So I went and overexposed a photo, and then even in post-processing, just really went overkill with my white and black sliders. So if you look at the histogram for this photo, it's atrocious. Running off the right with totally blowing out the whites, and then running off the left, blowing out the shadows. But it's just trying to show a different way I can interpret a scene. And so I really want to focus on the lines and the intersections there. And then let's show it in a different color palette than what people are used to seeing, this kind of high key look instead of the colors we're used to seeing. Love going to car shows. I showed some rusty cars before. There's a couple more coming up. But this car show in Maryland I used to go to, beautifully restored cars. So, don't necessarily like to have to see the whole car. Sometimes it's nice to just isolate some of the interesting details. So I love this convergence, kind of like some of the sand photos we saw earlier, the convergence of the lines with the smooth and kind of going really strong contrast here. And then this round shape of the headlight kind of offsetting all that. So there's a lot of geometry. It's kind of a study of design as well as it is a black and white photo. So I took that one and I turned around and it was a totally different car. I had this wonderful baby blue color. But again, I wanted to isolate down some of the elements of the car. A lot of engineering goes into the details of some of these cars, and sometimes maybe it's not as appreciated as it could be. So got down low. You're seeing the grass of the field that these cars are displayed on, reflecting up in the chrome there. If you look really closely in that circle there, you can see me crouched down taking this photo. I call this one Art Deco because it kind of reminds you of that era where we had some really nice, vibrant colors and then curves and lines kind of intersecting and playing together, but very basic shapes. But I also like the old rusty, crusty cars. So this one obviously has seen a lot of coats of paint and a lot of primer and different rust showing through. So much like the beautifully restored one we saw 2 photos ago, this would be the counterpoint to that. Maybe I should rearrange these, put them side by side, but future presentation. So I just love the patina on this car and just the different crazy colors, and then amp that up even further in post-processing. So I saw this car, this truck, and this is kind of my initial thought. It kind of I guess my son was a toddler at the time, so we're probably watching that Pixar's movie Cars, where all the cars have faces on them. So I kind of envisioned like this, a person smiling at me or someone with a big bushy mustache. And so I got up on my tiptoes and put my camera kind of up on my head to get this aerial perspective of this work truck. And, it's funny. This is just straight out of the camera, a little snapshot. And it was kind of funny. I was like, I could process that, do something with it. I was like, no, that's cool for a nice snapshot. But what is really attracting me here? And I really love that intersection of the grille at the bottom that was silvery and had some blue tints to it, and then contrasting it with the curves going the other way, and then kind of all rusty. So I said, well, let me emphasize the parts that I like. And so I came in with this composition with that intersection of the different shapes and curves and the different colors blending together with the white and the blue streaks at the bottom there, counterbalancing with the brighter oranges and reds at the top. So when I see this kind of thing, when I'm driving down the road, like, to me, this is a gold mine of creative opportunity. So this is a junkyard up by my in-laws, and I'd driven by this junkyard for years and years and never stopped. And this is what I saw from the road. And so it just looks like, it's not very interesting cars. Like, you're not seeing any Rolls Royces or something interesting in there. But you got to look past the surface, right? You got to go exploring. And like some of those images we just saw were taken in junkyards just like this. Oh, I lost it there. So finally, I decided on one of my trips up to my in-laws, I said, gosh darn it, I'm going to go to that junkyard and I'm going to take some pictures. There's got to be some good stuff in there. And so we were up there at Christmas time, thus the snow on the ground. And so I pulled off. I'm taking a few photos from the street, kind of like the one before. And the owner lived on the property. And so he saw me there and he kind of came out. I was like, hey, what are you doing? And I was like, oh, I'm just a photographer. I like all your old cars here. He's like, can I walk around your property? I always try to ask permission, if I can find the owner. So I asked, can I walk around? I'm a photographer. And he's like, oh, you're not the first guy to stop here and want to take photos of my old collection. I was like, oh, okay. So you can see there's the snow there. And so I saw this panel truck, this delivery truck here, and it had this cool vine growing over it. But I'm not there in the best of conditions. Got all the snow on the ground. It's kind of annoying, tromping around in the snow, getting all wet. the lighting wasn't really that great. But one of the things I've learned with this kind of stuff is if it's a subject that you know you can revisit, like in this case, close to my in-laws, which I visit every couple times a year. If you notice a place you can revisit, go ahead and take some snapshots while you can. Just get your mind flowing, so you can then go later. Go back and you're warm by your fireplace with a nice beverage and reflect on the photos and see, kind of formulate your game plan for the next time you can go. So I really like this truck and this vine growing through it. And so I just took this snapshot and this, just right out of the camera, nothing special here, but it allowed me to have an image to think about, to reflect back on and study the image and think about what kind of compositions could I come up with. So next time I'm there, I'm kind of prepared with a little bit of a game plan of what I want to come up with. So I came back, and then this is the image I took next time I was up with my in-laws in better lighting conditions. So went with a sepia. I liked the brown. I thought played off well with the twigs here and the branch versus a panel truck. And again, isolating down some shapes, the nice curve of the wheel there, some plain parts of the panel truck, but then this chaotic vine kind of leading your eyes through the image. Also, just close-up shots. Sometimes the cars are too damaged or too obscured to really get wide shots. So sometimes just going into detailed shots on the doors, the interplay on the right of the colors with the bit of chrome there in the middle to kind of separate them out, and not exactly a 1/3, 2/3 composition, but 40-60. And then just more of these chaotic ones of just, again, like you're starting to see a theme with some of my work with the intersection of the chaoticness with a smoothness, like in the upper left there. And then the bottom one kind of looking like fire or something like that against a blue sky. And then sometimes it's just about the details, especially these older cars. A lot more thought put into to curves and to the look of the instruments and the little knobs and stuff. Everything today is so utilitarian. Is it utilitarian? It's all about how the function over form. And so back in the day, a lot more interesting thought went into design. And so sometimes the design elements. And again, like some of these photos, by itself, each of these photos, not super spectacular, but as part of a collection, if I were to do, let's say, a book on old rusty cars, it'd be nice to balance out, a collection of, some close-up shots of tires or wide shots of a bunch of cars with, interweave some of these detailed shots. You sometimes you see the cars and they're not they're really pretty gutted. But you can still make an interesting composition of it with this just rusted car just sitting, kind of being overtaken by these vines. One headlight, amazingly. Everything else been gutted from it, but they left one headlight. HDR is great for these kinds of situations. So in this case, stood in the back of this pickup truck and shooting through what was the back window, and then just really going over the top with the HDR. I usually don't do a lot of this heavy-handed HDR. This is like a 5-shot HDR, but heavily saturated. But I thought it worked for this image to really kind of bring some color to the image is already pretty brown and black. Just kind of make it normal. But if you look, like the leaves are kind of crunchy from the over processing, or overcooked, as some people like to say. But I think it works all right for this particular image. This is a different junkyard. I like this car, and a lot of different shadow and light to deal with on this image. So this is a 5 or 7 shot HDR to get light in the shadows, as well as to retain the highlights and stuff like that. And so this car wasn't very colorful to begin with. And so I opted for the black and white, but then it still wasn't, I don't know, there wasn't enough to it. And I really like these little, what they're called, May apples, bushes there at the bottom. I really like those. But in full color, the image didn't work for me. And I wanted the black and white. So I used NYX, well, it's now DxO, but Silver Effects Pro. It's a Blackware conversion software that allows you to do selective colorization. After you convert to black and white, you can bring back colors or parts of the image. So I just brought back some of the greens of the image to bring out these May apples on the bottom. Just again, it's just a different way to interpret the image. You know, if you don't want all color or don't want all black and white, you know, put them together and pick the best of both worlds. Another image, this is a abandoned silk factory in Western Maryland, Lana Coating Silk Mill. You can take tours of it. It's privately owned. And in black and white, it looked all right. This is like a 7-shot HDR. It still wasn't enough to catch all the light. I'm blowing out the windows in the back there, but that's all right. But as a black and white, it was okay, but it was kind of a cluttered image. It was kind of hard to make out the different rows of the machines there. So using that selective colorization to bring back some of the orange and some of the red help delineate between the different sets of machine there. So sometimes you need to totally create the image yourself. I was down in the basement of this silk mill and very dark down there. I have a flashlight and I like this old wrench and this bench. And so I composed this image, but it wasn't working for me. And I said, how can I make something different? So I pulled out my Lens Baby. I have a Lens Baby Composer Pro 2, which is a tilt shift lens, allows me to selectively focus on one area of the image, and then it creates a nice blur of the rest of the image. It's not just a depth of field thing, it's actually picking a circle of sharpness of the image, in this case off center to the left. So focused on that. And then I dangled my flashlight above the wrench to create a little spotlight on the wrench. And so just dangled it there for a few seconds while I was taking this pretty long exposure because it was pretty dark down there in the basement. Wasn't a lot of lighting back down there. So sometimes all the elements don't always come together. And so you find a composition you like, and then you use your other tools you have, whether it's your lens choice, or in this case, a lens choice and adding selective lighting, and then obviously post-processing going into as well, to kind of create the final image that you want. A couple more examples here, we'll wrap up. Wanted to do this side by side. So where I used to live in Maryland, there was this nature area where they plant all these giant sunflowers every year. Very popular with photographers, and also for wedding shooting, photo shoots and stuff like that. And so most people are taking shots of this huge field, acres and acres of these sunflowers. And I'd taken some of those photos too, but I wanted to really isolate one really nice sunflower I found. So I found this one. It was kind of standing up a little taller than the rest, and it was leaning down towards the ground, which actually worked to my advantage because I could lay on the ground and look up at it, and then basically change its perspective so it was squared off then. And that allowed me to put the sky right behind it. So a nice plain background with the sky. And so, interesting kind of flower. It's not perfect. That's fine. But I like the leaves and stuff like that. But I said, well, how can I show it somewhere different? Everyone else takes it in full color, makes these nice cheery photos, would make a wonderful postcard for a little greeting card, like have a nice day or something. But I wanted to show it in some way different. Like, how can I show it differently? And I said, well, I don't think I've ever seen a sunflower as a sepia print. So again, back to Silver Effects Pro from DxO. And a lot of dodging and burning and selective focus and stuff on this to kind of get the final product I want. So a lot of hours went into this particular one, which is a little bit more than I typically spend. But for this one, I needed it to get the final look I wanted, to kind of make it something different, right? That not everyone else is going to have this same kind of photo. All right, so I'll end you with one last little snippet here, just a few photos. So one winter back in Maryland, we were all snowed in. We had several feet of snow. We called it Snowmageddon, I think, back in 2010. And everyone was trapped inside. And so I was really feeling my creative urges. Like I wanted to go out and photo, but I just didn't want to go out in all that snow. That was just going to be a mess. And so, but I really wanted to take some photos. And so I said, well, let me find things in my house maybe I could take photos of. And so I was making my breakfast or whatever that day. And I was like, wow, we got a lot of interesting kitchen gadgets. I was like, I wonder if these would make some interesting, photos. And so my first thought, being a little perfectionist, was like, all right, let me get out my macro lens, my tripod, I'll get out my studio lights, I'll get out my backdrop. Take me a couple hours to get everything set up, and then I'll have a great little studio, and then I'll take my photos. And I'm like, that's just going to detract from the experience. And so I said the purpose was to give me a creative outlet. And so I want to get rid of all those distractions of all that stuff and focus on just a creative exercise. And so in this case, I used my smartphone, had a little adapter that slides on that turns my camera on my smartphone into a macro lens. It's called an Ollie clip or something like that. They make all kinds of different versions of them now, but back then there's only a couple different ones. So slid this little macro attachment. So this is, again, the audience participation part. So get your mute buttons unmuted. So I'm going to show you a series of photos. I want you to see if you can tell what I am taking a photo of. So how about this first one? Anyone know what this is?
Looks like a whisk.
A whisk. Right. So I'm going to have this macro lens. I'm getting really close, very, very shallow depth of field. And so to me, it's just about the play of the lines, the shadows, the lights. Again, not an award-winning photo, but that wasn't the purpose. The purpose was, how can I train my eye to take some ordinary object that I've seen every day of my life, every weekend when we make breakfast or make pancakes with this wisp? How can I show it some way different, some way creatively? All right, so how about this one?
Measuring cups.
Measuring cups. Yeah, measuring spoons. We have a nice selection of all the way from quarter teaspoon up to like 2 tablespoons. So just stacked them up. So again, this one's kind of obvious, but I'm just playing with the lines and the kind of like the stadium chairs we saw earlier. So just a little bit of window light coming in. And all I did is just put a piece of white paper down on my kitchen counter and then just set these things up and then just played with different angles in my smartphone. How about this one?
Food coloring.
Food coloring, right. So, I mean, this one, not as creative, I think, as some of the other ones, but just playing with the shapes and the colors, which would have been nicer if the food coloring bottles are totally full, would have been better. But again, I didn't want to make it complicated. I just training my eyes to see things differently. All right, what about this one?
Looks like a soap dish.
That is the most common response of the soap dish or the suction cups at the bottom of soap dish. Great guess, but that is not what it is.
The bottom of a baking pan.
No, not exactly. But I can tell you that I bet you every one of you has this or something very similar to this in your kitchen. I'll give you one more clue. I'll show you a different photo. So here's another photo of that same object.
Yeah, it looks like a colander.
Another good guess, but remember, this object is part of this object.
Yeah, I know.
These two
That's why I'm
objects
like,
are the same.
So it's the garlic. Is it the garlic press thing?
No.
that you smash
Oven
the
mitt.
garlic with?
No, but you're getting really close.
Pothole.
Trim it.
Oh,
Oh, no way.
So, I wouldn't, is as creative as I am, as good as I am at spotting things, I would never have come across this. It was only because I was doing this exercise of digging through my closets or digging through my cupboards, digging through my drawers, saying, what could I find? Well, how can I show things differently? And that's when I opened my cabinets. We had all these spices. Like, well, what can I do with those? Like, well, it's just a square can. There's nothing interesting there. I was like, but what about this lid? I could focus on this. And so now that you look back, if you look closely, I didn't do a very good job cleaning it beforehand. You see all the little pepper flakes still stuck on the lid there. So again, I would never have come across this on my own if I hadn't been forcing myself to look more closely at these everyday objects that I see in my kitchen. So I'll leave you a little bit of homework or maybe some more inspiration. If you like this kind of stuff, if you're inspired by some of the things I showed you today, here's my inspiration wall. This is one of now 2 bookcases I have. My wife keeps saying, no more books, Greg, but I keep finding myself going to used bookstores and finding more books. So these are a few of my favorites that I think would give you some really good inspiration for learning to see creatively. So I've really covered a lot of different gamuts here. Elliot Porter, this book on the Glen Canyon, some really wide shot landscapes, but also some detailed shots, just playing with light and color and the shapes of the canyon, really beautiful. If you want something really more close, zoomed up, Carl Blasfeld, really interesting stuff where he arranged different pieces of the plant world. He was like a science teacher, biology teacher by trade. So very interesting graphic patterns there. This light and shadow there in the middle by Claire Yaffe, never heard of her. Apparently she was some type of like a art teacher or something like that. And this was a book she put together for her PhD of a collection of just all kinds of different things, but playing with the theme of light and shadow. So this is a photographer I never would have come across ever in a Google search because she's not really that well known. Very local to whatever part of the country she was from. But I came across her book at a used bookstore. And so that's one of the great things for exploring these used bookstores. You come across artists you never heard of before. I'll highlight one last book. And this is where you can take out your phones and take a picture of this page, or I guess you're recording this. You can always come back and look at it later. In plain view, there towards the bottom, Abstractions of Flight. Caroline had access to the Air and Space Museum and the Udvar Hazy Museum in Virginia. And so she went there one night with all kinds of crew and studio lights and stuff like that. Really cool close-up abstracts of the flight, the planes and rockets that they have there. So anyway, I hope these can be some inspirations for you to find. If my presentation was enough, you can check out some of these master photographers and some of their work. So I'll lead it with one last thing. So you heard me mention a couple times in this presentation about, sometimes you're just taking pictures for yourself or you're taking pictures to train your eye. And I think sometimes we as photographers, especially being part of these camera clubs and stuff like that, we get so focused on, I must have the best image. I must have the award-winning image, the image I need for that competition or for that gallery submission. And that's great goal. Good to have those kinds of images in your catalog, but you should also take images that just inspire you, much like that picture of the waterfall at the start of the presentation. And so I saw this quote somewhere, and this guy was talking about how he's a playwright, and he writes these plays where everyone dies at the end. And he said they're not popular at all because they're very depressing. But he says, but I just have to do it. That's the type of play I like to write. That's the type of story I like to tell. And so he had this quote, and he said, artistic people create because they have to, whether there are takers or not. So hopefully you take that to heart, inspires your own photography. You want to see more of my work, you can check out my website, Images Underfoot, all kinds of variety of stuff in there. And that's all I got for you guys.
Thanks, Greg. It was a great presentation. I don't see any questions in the chat. Some people said thanks for the presentation. Anybody any questions for Greg? Comments?
Thank you very much.
Yeah, Greg, thank you. This was wonderful. There's so many things, takeaways that I took from it and that. But I kind of on a lot of these presentations, I jot down a few notes in that. But I really like how you're able to find those, I'll say, smaller scenes within the larger, I'll say, landscape or the larger picture. And I know I'm guilty myself a lot of times of going out and if I do some landscape photography and that, I take a look and I'm always looking at the big picture and trying to capture this big scene and so forth and that. But what you're able to find, like the real small scenes in that, the small details, using the macro lens, even though you're out in the mountains or out in some of those places and so forth. I thought that was amazing. And then one of the other quotes you brought in there too was like seeing the potential and training the eye. So a lot of what you're doing there really takes a lot of focus and concentration, and not just look at what's out there, what your eyes are seeing as you open them and look at the whole view, but really take a real close look at the little small things that are all around us. And in some cases, in your examples in that, it's just the everyday things that we use that are there's images there that we never even think about.
Yeah, it's like I went down the other year after I'd moved here to the Colorado Rail Museum in Golden.
Mm-hmm.
That's not too far from you guys. And I guess I was spoiled because I grew up in Maryland, and we have a train museum called the B&O Railroad Museum up in Baltimore, and it has a 100-year-old full roundhouse, which is pretty uncommon to see in itself. But huge train collection, beautifully restored trains inside this roundhouse, and then other less restored stuff outside. So just a wealth of photographic potential. And so when I first moved here, I went to the Colorado Rail Museum. And if you've been there, they do have a few interesting trains, but all their collection is outside. So it's subjected to the Colorado elements. And so a lot of the trains are just, they're faded and rusted and kind of falling apart, or they haven't been restored. And so they're not maybe what a train enthusiast would like to see. But if you are into kind of more creative or abstract photography, there's a lot of potential there. I didn't have any of the photos from that in this particular presentation, but I've been back there several times just for detailed shots of the different nuts and bolts and different circles on intersecting pistons and all kinds of details of rust and textures and stuff like that. So that's another gold mine of a place. Laos tripods, nice big wide open space. Even during COVID, it was great because you could go there and socially distance yourself from everyone else and take your photos. So that's one spot for you that's close to you guys. Has a lot of potential.
If you like the old cars, there's a place out in Elizabeth called the Rambler Ranch.
I've seen photos that I haven't made it out there quite yet. But yeah, I've seen some photos. That's definitely on my list.
Yeah, it's a great place to go, and it's a lot of different things out there. So
maybe that's one of the ones that should be on our list to add again as a destination for the club to go out.
There you go.
Well, what I'm set up for June 24th right now, Mark Morris with Tamron we're gonna have a day out there, and he'll bring some of his lenses and stuff.
Okay.
I don't have all the specifics yet, but that's the date we've picked. I've talked to Terry at the Rambler Ranch, and so it's pretty much a go. We just have to finalize the details and let everybody know.
Great.
So it's a Saturday. I wanted to do a Friday, but you people at work, we have to do a Saturday.
Oh yes, it's working.
Those people who work. A couple other comments too in the chat and so forth, and that a lot of complimentary comments and so forth, and that great images, ideas. Thank you. And Kathy Allen Chin, she put in there. I enjoy how you find smaller parts of a scene, how you find texture and pattern. Very good presentation. Thank you. And to that point, you brought up a lot of like texture, shape, shadows, light, and so forth, and that. And so many of those things are out there just in, like you said, those smaller scenes and that. In some of those too, I think you mentioned a couple of those ones where you added texture in some of your post-processing, dodging and burning and so forth. But all of that, very impressive.
Yeah.
Great, thanks.
And I'm sure we'll be in touch with you to judge one of our competitions we'll have this year.
Sure. Yeah, I love that. Yeah, hopefully we'll be in person next time.
Yeah,
We'll have to watch out for these third Wednesdays in winter.
Yeah.
By the time we get to summer, hopefully we're past those, but we've still got a couple of winter and spring months in front of us. But hopefully the third Wednesday doesn't become a trend for too much longer.
Yeah, hopefully. All right. Well, unless there's any more questions, we'll give everybody a little bit extra time. We're ending a little earlier. Greg, thank you very much. I appreciate you doing the presentation. It was a great presentation. And we'll see everybody on March 1st of next year, or of next month.
All right. Thanks again, everyone.
Thanks.
Yeah, thank you.
All right. Have a good night.
See you, everybody.
Bye.
Bye.